Thank you for having me. I'm born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and so that's, I don't know, about an hour and a half south of here. And I grew up in what is now a predominantly Latino community. When we first moved into that neighborhood that I can recall my earliest memories, it was still mostly a black neighborhood, and so we were probably the second or third Latino family to move into that neighborhood, and this was back in the early 80s. But since then, right, it's probably the other way around, where there's maybe now one or two, maybe three black families who live in that neighborhood. A working class neighborhood. Parents were working class, immigrated to the US in the 70s, and I come from a big family. We're a family of 8, and four of the four older brothers and sisters were all born in Mexico and educated early there, and were transplanted to the U.S. I was the first U.S. born child from my parents, and then I have 3 younger siblings who then have to, sort of also born in the U.S. And so we're kind of like a split, mixed citizen, resident kind of family there in the southwest side of San Antonio.
So over by SeaWorld?
No. In fact, it'll be close to downtown. It'll be one of the sort of landmarks of the city is the Alamo Dome. And we are literally about 3 blocks, maybe 4 blocks walking distance from there. We were there before the dome was there. There was this old iron factory that was there. We used to play there all the time, mountain bikes and stuff like that. And so, but it's the southwest side near downtown, shot here from one of the major artery freeways that cuts through the city.
Did you grow up going to the Texas Institute of Texan Cultures?
Oh, absolutely. We went there rarely. We never went there as a family. It was costly. Both parents worked all the time. 2 incomes, still sort of surviving off starving wages. And so the times that I did get to go was with school trips, field trips, and they were wonderful. Professionally, I'm a historian now, but then I wasn't too much into history. But I did find it fascinating. I didn't understand much of what I was looking at, but I did enjoy looking at the things there on Native American. As I reflect back now, Native American history, early black history, certainly early history of Mexicanos, ethnic Mexicans in the region, and so now, right, as an adult, I do make an effort. My family's in San Antonio. I don't live in San Antonio anymore, but my family is there, and I try to at least once a year make it back to the institute because they do wonderful programming out of there now, and I'm far more aware of the importance of an institution like that. So, but yeah, we're walking distance from that too.
Growing up in San Antonio, where there is a large Hispanic population, what did you experience regarding feeling racialized in a racist society?
Yeah, so my parents lived most of their lives in Mexico. And so I sort of, and while I was a U.S. citizen, I understood that the experiences, right, the truths for my parents and my brothers and sisters were different. Because while they are Mexican or right, as others would call them, Hispanic, there was sort of this divide because of their status, right? They weren't full citizens, and while many and most are, they were residents, and so there's sort of this inter-ethnic kind of prejudice and discrimination, even from other Mexican Americans, long established sort of Tejanos, if you will, and so there was always that. I sort of, I understood very early that my parents were different, and by extension, I was different, and not really seen as part of the group. I was otherized by not just a larger sort of white establishment, but also even by members of my own community, right? Mexican and Mexican American communities who have sort of this long history of being in the U.S. And then when we first, as far as I could sort of remembering as far back as I can, I grew up in a mostly black neighborhood, and so there was that divide too. I mean, a lot of the racism came from these black families who saw my family and myself as an intrusion into their own community. And so it was a violent childhood, and I had to defend myself and my honor. I had to defend my race. I had to defend my sisters, obviously, and other family members. And I took it personal when they called me racist terms. The first time that I heard the word Mexican was when black families and black kids in my neighborhood called me that. And never one to turn away from that kind of challenge. I confronted it. It was painful, it was dangerous. I never shied away from it. I think it made me the person that I am today. I just try to destroy that kind of language all the time. I teach at an HBCU, and I make it clear to my students that that is a racist term. It is a term that is used to promote hate and hurt people, and I won't have it in the classroom. Many students are shocked to understand that, to hear that. That's a racist term. That's just how I always said it. We'll change it. Don't say it like that anymore, because now you know. But yeah, a lot of that, growing up, it was very challenging. Not many white families lived in our neighborhood, so there was that brown-black kind of dysfunction that was taking place early on. So while San Antonio did have a large Latino population, we didn't live in that part of the community. We lived in the community where we were in the minority, and it was sort of colored peoples tearing at each other.
What were your experiences with white people in San Antonio during that time?
I didn't have much interaction with whites. The only time I did is when they were sort of the leaders in the classrooms and in the schools. They were the law enforcement. They were the ones who reprimanded my family left and right for transgressions, misdemeanors, things like that. They were the ones who controlled the city. They were the ones who, right, as I understand it now, were the power brokers. My interaction with whites was limited. While white students attended my school, I didn't form any really meaningful relationship with whites until my middle school years. Because I would be involved in student clubs and as often as I could be, but I was really into sports. While the middle school that I went to was riddled with ethnic strife and racial strife, the football field became sort of this space where we could suspend some of those things. And so that Chicano and black and white students who viewed each other as maybe enemies in the cafeteria were allies on the field. And so one of my dearest friends in middle school was a white kid, a white boy from Tennessee. Marty Magnon was his name. He had a peculiar last name. And we called him Tennessee. He was from Tennessee. He had a funny haircut, short in the front, long in the back, the mullet haircut. And his mother was nice, and his sister was nice, and I would be over there to their home, and they lived also in a predominantly black neighborhood, and they too encountered that kind of prejudice that I know I did, and he and I formed a real meaningful relationship, and then unfortunately, he and his family moved back. I think that the trauma was too much for his mom, and she had moved down here with her boyfriend, who I think he was a truck driver, so he was gone a lot of the time as a truck driver, and it was just too much, and she had to, Marty was always being threatened, and I often had to sort of fight for him, and try to tell people to leave him alone, he's my friend, that kind of stuff. But I grew up also in a period of gangs, and so a lot of that was gang related. I never really was in a gang. I sometimes boasted that I was, not really. But sometimes you become the victim of gang violence, and that was also a problem. So my interaction with whites was very limited. Young people mostly in the class, and then adults mostly as the leaders of everything.
Did anyone was anyone that ever harmed by gang-related violence?
Yeah, indeed. I had several, and I had many black friends also. I mean, just for the record, to make that clear, I did form alliances with several of the young people there from the black neighborhood. We became best friends. Just thick as thieves, right? In many instances, quite literally, thick as thieves. And but yeah, several of my friends, in fact, would become victims of gang violence. I was a victim of gang violence, and you have sort of these fights, right? What they call getting jumped, that kind of stuff. And others, I was fortunate that I only maybe got punched in the eye or something like that. Others sent to the hospital, and it was serious violence, gun violence, and those kinds of things. And I think that sports and keeping me busy after school really kept me out of trouble. And I think that sports also was responsible for why I was able to successfully pass my classes and even graduate, because we had a sort of high dropout rate. Brown and black and working class whites who attend our school were the high dropout rate, but I was able to sort of survive that because of this rule in Texas, the no pass, no play. And I love football. I needed it, and I needed to play it, and so I would bring my books home, and I'd be at home. I'd be on the football field till 6:30, 7 o'clock, be home at 8, have dinner, and then till about 10 do my homework. And that was my life from the time that I could enter into organized sports from my middle school years through high school. And that kind of kept me out of the streets and kept me busy.
How did you get from there to 8 years into a teaching position with a PhD? How did you, what drove you into history?
I think that, in many ways, God did that. I did my part, and God did the rest. I didn't apply to college. I was going to graduate, and I didn't have sort of the foresight to think about the next step. My brothers and sisters had gone to community college, and they all sort of had been bounced out. It didn't work for them, and they quickly entered into the workforce. They, worked in restaurants, and they worked here and there, security guards, and I assumed that was going to be my role too. My parents, bless their hearts, believed in education, demanded that we went to school, made sure that we were there, reprimand us when we weren't. But I don't remember having a conversation with my parents about higher ed. How are we going to pay for it? No, we're not having those kinds of conversations. And so in my mind, that wasn't for me. That was for somebody else. That was for the families of rich kids from rich families. And that wasn't my lot. I was going to go and work like everybody else and see what the next thing was. But luckily, in high school, I had persons who were really invested in the welfare of the student population. My counselor, Jeff Blum, Mr. Blum. I was a senior. The deadline for applying was 4 or 5 days away. I'm playing hooky in the hallway. He stops me, and I'm thinking I'm about to get the 3rd degree. He asked me if I applied to college. I said I hadn't. He says, follow him. I did. We filled out an application to Texas State University, Southwest Texas State University back then, right here in San Marcos. Submitted one application, and turns out I was accepted. And he had me also fill out paperwork for financial aid. I didn't know what financial aid was. I didn't know about scholarships. I didn't know about fellowships. Filled out the financial aid paperwork. School's getting paid for. And I ended up going to school. I ended up going to Texas State University, SWT, when I was there. I went there 6 years. I entered into school. I was ill-prepared for college. I was too immature for college. I had bad grades my first semester. I was undisciplined. I had better grades the second semester, but they were still too poor to reinstate financial aid. I had to work that summer. I worked as a security guard every summer day at the San Antonio airport to be able to afford to pay tuition. And I did that, and the 3 years after that, I made almost near perfect grades every semester. Something had happened. I don't know what it was. Something turned around. I remember a conversation with my dad. My dad did construction work. He's a little man. He's a short guy. He's brave. He's a brave man. And I can remember being afraid of going to college. I can remember them driving me on my first day, and he reaches into his pocket. He gives me $20. That's all he had. That was probably his gas money. And he gives that to me. And I remember being afraid. I was like, man, I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I can do this. But I remember having, a couple of years later, having a conversation with him when I was having those doubts again. I don't think I can do this. And he says, well, look, if you can't do it, you can't do it. But if you can't do it because you don't try, well, then there's the problem. It says you can work You can be like me and work hard for the rest of your life. He did construction, and he would be gone at 6 in the morning and wouldn't get back to 6, 7 in the evening, and he'd get back bone tired, hands broken, skin, doesn't even feel anything in his fingers anymore. He says, you can work hard for the rest of your life like me. I'll never be able to retire. Or you can work hard for just a few more years and have the best job that you can possibly get. And it really did sort of put things in perspective for me. I mean, he didn't have to tell me that. I didn't have to listen to that. But we had to have that conversation, and it worked. I stuck through, I got in, and that drive, right? I get to college, it's a brand new experience for me. And you know, I take back what I said earlier when I said, you know, I didn't really have much interaction with whites. That all is going to change completely when I go to college. The high school that I went to was mostly Mexican and Mexican American. The second largest ethno-racial group there were blacks, and then we had whites and then some Asians and so forth. And but I get to San Marcos, and it's 85% white. It's a TWI, right? Traditionally white institution, and very quickly I am reminded, in not the kindest ways, of where I'm supposed to be, right, in society. And these racist terms that I first encountered living in a black neighborhood, I'm now encountering on the campus of an institution of higher learning. Confederate flags flying out of dorm windows, swastikas painted on dormitories where a great number of black and brown and or Asian kids were residing, and you know, chants and marches, and it became very ugly. It became very ugly. I was reminded again of the racism, and I was sort of self-teaching. I was self-learning. I was reading history books. I took a history class. It was a US history class, and the assignment in that history class was to do a family history paper. 7 pages. Nothing to, in my mind, 7 pages was too much, right? I was afraid, a sophomore. And I was like, 7 pages, that's a lot, but 7 pages. And the job was to document the history of your family. And so I sit down to start writing. Nothing is coming to me. And I'm trying to remember, and I'm trying to put the story together of 3 members, the oldest members of my family, my parents and my oldest brother. And there was nothing there. I had realized, and I was embarrassed, that I didn't know the history of my family. And by extension, right, I didn't know the history of my community. And I went to a predominantly Mexican and Mexican American school, and it wasn't taught to me. I didn't learn it. I didn't know it. And I was embarrassed. I was angered. So I began to sort of self-teach, right? And I began to read these books. I began to read Rudy Acuña's Occupied America. I began to read Arnoldo de Leon. They called them greasers. I began to read these things. Matt Mier, Chicanos. And it empowered me. It emboldened me. I joined student groups and student organizations, and I became sort of the education liaison in those places. And I would talk about Mexican and Mexican American history and civil rights history. And before I knew it, I was a history major. And I was working to uncover my own history, and I was working to document my history, and I was working to preserve and promote my history. And I joined the master's program there, and I took it to the next level. And in the master's program, I said, you know what, I'm going all the way. I mean, it's all the way or it's bust. And I went all the way. I was able to get into a PhD program, and I focused specifically on my history, that's how it came to be. You know, that drive was there. I didn't have all the tools. There's brilliant people that I sat in those rooms with. They knew the literature better than I did. They knew the terminology better than I did. They had better access. They had better access to resources than I did. They're probably living comfortable lives now. I'm oppressed by college loans, but I mean, I got it here now, man. And as a father now, I'm giving it to my kids, and you know, my goal is they don't make the same mistakes I do. My goal is they learn their history and the history of their people and their communities earlier than I did, and my goal is that they go and they impact their communities better than I am attempting to impact those communities. And so that's what it was. It was sort of that little history project that really kind of just, it blew everything up for me. I said, whoa, wait a minute, what is happening here? Why don't I know the story of my mother and my father. That's a shame. I mean, it was a real serious shame, and I had to undo that. I had to undo that serious shame, and that's how it came to be.
Wow, it's powerful. Is there any particular story that you want to share about a time maybe when you've shared a lot already, but when it was made clear to you that racism was a prevalent problem?
I had a roommate. He wasn't a roommate. He was with me all the time. That we assumed the roles of roommates. He and I were student leaders on campus, and he had a roommate who would viciously attack him and shout racial slurs to him, and it got very violent. And when we went to university leaders, they didn't do anything. I would see students of color arrested and expelled from campus for minor transgressions, for shouting back to an instructor, kicked out of school. This kid attacked his roommate, and nothing happened to him. And I understood at that moment, that he was benefiting from privilege. He was benefiting from white privilege, because the administration actually came to his aid. Law enforcement was dismissed, and we demanded that they do something else. And the only thing that they were able to do was to sort of send these kids to a workshop to talk about race. They brought in persons to come in to explain to them what race and racism is, and then they watched a video, a documentary, which is actually very powerful, called Skin Deep, where these adult men, Asian, Mexican, black, white, are talking about race in America. That's the only thing that happened to them. And I knew at that moment, right, that I am in an institution that expects me to fail. I am in an institution that is training me and teaching me to become part of the labor force. And I am in an institution that seems to care more about some students than it does about others. That angered me. That was injustice for my friend. It didn't happen to me. It happened to him. And he revealed to me that it happened to him, and then when he revealed, we moved forward with it. It wasn't fair. It isn't fair that he gets off scot-free for what he did. He committed a crime, and he got off scot-free. Had I done the same, I mean, we're talking about the prison pipeline. It's these institutions that are manufacturing this. And I knew at that moment that that this is a mountain that I have to climb. There's no going around it. There's no going through it. I have to climb it. I have to climb it with a boulder. That was real awakening for me. I mean, I had already seen the swastikas. I had already seen the Confederate flags. I already heard the chants. I had already seen the sororities and fraternities dressing up in Mexican costumes and having white Emancipation Day celebrations. I had seen those. That didn't shock me. I had seen that all the time. That episode shocked me. He was off him and his other friend off scot-free. We saw him on campus that whole year after that. Yeah.
Wow.
The racism is real. The instruments in place to protect it, that's real. It's alive and well. It's become more visible. It's become more vocal. Right? I mean, it's become more empowered, but it's been there. That's the legacy that exists right out of this institution of slavery and this institution of supremacy. It's very real. It's a part of my daily life. I live with racism.
Thank you. Anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So we do absolutely live in some challenging times, turbulent times, tempestuous indeed, and times have always sort of been tempestuous. And I get angered. when the leadership doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It reminds me of the failed leadership back when I was an undergraduate. And I get angry when the leadership doesn't do what they're supposed to do, when they don't do the things that they need to do to protect persons and citizens and young people. Right? They didn't protect my young friend when he was a student. And I see the leadership now not doing what it's supposed to do to protect young people, specifically undocumented youth. It's an embarrassment. It's a shame. And I mean, we need to put them on notice, and we need to not let them get away with it. I will never forgive them. I would never forgive them for how they have turned their backs on these young people and on these working class communities. I will take that with me to my grave. I would never forgive them for it, even if they said sorry to me 1,000 times. They have caused serious trauma in the lives of countless communities and countless families across this nation. They have forever disrupted the harmony that might have existed in those families. And there's nothing that those people can do to get it back. They would never get it back. Their descendants will forever be afflicted by that. So I will never forgive them for it. And I'll never let them get off the hook for it. And it angers me. I am angered about it. I'm angered also that leaders from my own community aren't committed like they say they're committed. Leadership from the Latino community, from the Chicano community, who spend their time elsewhere and not in the trenches where they said they're going to be, where I asked them to be and they promised that they would be. That angers me too. I'm not going to let them forget that I feel abandoned by that. But I get to sleep good at night. I do. And I sleep good, and I'm restful, and I'm hopeful, and I look forward, because I am so impressed. I am so impressed by the young people who have stood up for themselves, by the young persons who are brave. I talk about bravery, but I just talk about it. This is bravery in action. These young people, by the hundreds and by the thousands, are walking out of schools, are walking out of the workplace, are walking to local administrations, are holding sit-ins and demonstrations and rallies, and they are putting these people on notice, and they are taking it to the streets, and they are using very creative methods to try to implement change. It's because of them, right, that I can sleep. And it's because of them that I know that eventually, we will destroy, right, this racism. We will destroy, right, this xenophobia. We will get rid of this. And it's because people, young people, right, who I think are the bravest persons in this nation, the most vulnerable, are the face of the new movements in America. And I applaud them, and I wish I was brave like them, and I wish that I could inspire people like them, and I wish that I can do more for them. But I'm glad that they're there, and I'm glad that they're beating those drums the loudest. And I'm glad that I know of them, because that is truly what allows me to sleep. Because other than that, I would be a bitter old man. I'd just be too angry. But I see their love. I listen to their stories, and they talk about family, and they talk about love, and I see it, man, and it melts that anger away. That changes my heart. That really touches my heart. And I think that if other persons heard those stories and seen those stories, I think that their hearts change too. And I think that then the laws that they write will change as well. Storytelling is powerful. It's healing. And it's just too bad that not many people are willing to listen. They should be willing to listen. It will forever change.